Pike slime is okay, but not pike slime is better. Welcome everyone to another awesome episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Today we have a very cool episode, and I know we say that every single episode, and I know we say that about that every single episode, but this one's pretty cool because it's going to affect every single person that's listening. We're going to talk about something that every single person should have in their tackle box. This is tackle box essentials. We're not talking about fishing lures. We're talking about little things that'll make your life so much easier and safer. So before we get into that, we have, as tradition states, we have an interesting fishing fact. No, we don't. It's a special day. We have a TNT, which stands for what, Andrew?
Techniques and tips or something.
Yeah, something like that.
We're not sure. We made the acronym and then decided to make it mean whatever we wanted, much like iCast. We made the acronym first.
Exactly. Just because I like using explosion noises like this.
We need a better sound sampling platform, Jesse.
Yes.
So my little technique is actually, it's not new, but it has fallen out of fashion. And I don't mean fashion like, the gala, where the less clothes you wear, the more impressed people are. Like, no, this is something that should be used a lot more, I think, especially for the average angler. This is not something you're going to have done on a pro circuit at all. You will never see, one of the Johnson brothers out there doing this little trick trying to win a tournament. No. But with modern day, everyone's gone to, or most anglers that we find or that we see are going more and more finesse, right? Wouldn't you agree, Jesse? Like finesse is like the big thing now.
It's the biggest trend now. Again, we talked about iCast last week. All the new products, a lot of them are finesse oriented.
Yeah, I mean, there's whole companies right now that are finesse oriented, which never existed before. And for good reason, because fish are getting finicky. You want to be able to target them with sometimes not that big thing they've seen for years. Now, something that they haven't seen for years, but something that I find whenever I get an old tackle box, and I even found one in the most recent tackle box that I got given, is something that may seem out of place. And it's kind of in line with, as fortune would have it, it's in line with our topic today. It's something that I find in pretty much every old tackle box I open, but something I never see in any modern ones. And that is a fly. So this is my personal fly box. And this is where I used to bring fly fishing, but I'll have a couple of flies in my tackle box. And you might think, why, Andrew? If you're not bringing your whole fly rod, why would you have any flies in your tackle box? Now, Jesse may have already picked up on what technique I'm going to talk about. Do you have any thoughts on what it might be?
Is it going to be attaching a fly behind a spoon?
That is part of it. So attaching a fly behind a spoon is a great way to fish a fly a bit deeper. There's other ways you can even, it's called, what I want to talk about is trolling flies. So again, trolling spoons, trolling a spinner even, and putting a line tied off to the treble even, to that bait, and have a line that comes back further, and it's tying a fly behind it. So that will run a little bit deeper, and then you have a nice little woolly bugger or a small streamer or a stone nymph or something just right behind. And it might seem odd for those who are fishing their cottage or whatnot, or going up for a weekend, but especially in the evening, I find it's really, really effective. And it's one of those things where it can seem odd to have like two different baits on your line. It's like, it's like drop shotting, but with a lure instead. Like, okay, that can be done. But it's very similar to what steelhead guys do. They'll often have their bead and then a couple feet up their line or a foot up their line, they have a fly. So they have two separate presentations happening in order to entice. Perhaps the fish didn't want that big bait coming by, but there's that little bit of morsel, I'll have that instead. So trolling flies can be really effective. I know even my dad and I, we were at the cottage one year and the flies were just at the top of the water. Those golden days, Jesse, when you're just looking out, the water's flat, calm, you're seeing ripples everywhere, and it's not from raindrops, it's from like flies like coming down, hitting the surface. And it's midsummer, like nothing's emerging at this point. They're just bugs all over. And some of those evenings, you'll just look out and see smallmouth bass just jumping like 4 feet out of the water left and right, because that's all they're feeding on. It's just a fly bite. And even at the cottage, we've had that with pike. So what my dad and I did we had some flies in our tackle box. Again, at that point, I didn't even own a fly fishing rod. But again, my dad being kind of old school, we had flies. So we tied a couple of those on. We actually just did 2 tandem flies. We put a spring bobber in front of it so that they would, I find that like the thill balsa wood bobbers, not the round ones, when they're paddling along or moving at a constant pace, they dive just a little bit, but stay buoyant. So it was a good way to get the flies subsurface, but still nice and high. So you didn't get this long like streak of water behind it. So that was the technique we were using. And we were just trolling tandem flies. And we couldn't keep the bass off. Like that was one of those amazing moments that I love looking back on, of just paddling along in that canoe, completely silent, and your rod's going off left and right. You can't keep up with the amount of bass. As soon as you start paddling again, they're on it again. So that's one of the things that, again, it was used a long time. When guys are trolling, they often would troll a fly behind their bait, behind their spoon, behind their spinner. But it's not done as much anymore. But it's worth it. The best thing about it is, unlike other techniques where you might need to bring an extra set of weights, hooks, and soft plastics, whatnot, flies take up next to no space in your tackle box. If you want, you can just like hook them into your hat, like a cool dude from the 40s, like Vlad, like Vlad might have done. The flies, they take up no space, and you don't need to bring a lot. Just bring like 2 or 3 just to have them. And it's something that can be really effective, especially on those finesse days. It's an amazing finesse presentation. It's kind of like a really downsized big salmon flasher is your spoon, and then right behind it is your actual bait you're presenting. And you just downsized what guys are trolling on the Great Lakes down for different species like walleye, bass, pike. So that's my little TNT for this week. And if you have done it before, please reach out if you had success with it, or if it's something you still do, or maybe it's something you've only heard from your grandpa about doing and you thought, man, that's weird. Why would I ever do that? And now you heard it on this podcast, it might be like, I should try that.
No, they're probably thinking, wow, that's weird. Why would I ever do that?
Man, Andrew's as weird as my grandpa.
It's like my grandpa was crazy. That was cool. Actually, that I've heard a lot of people have really good success with that, Algonquin Park. And they'll just put a Williams wobbler, a few feet of line, and then like a fly, like a woolly bugger, and they'll just cast it behind the canoe, and then they'll be just paddling to their site. And, you got that spoon wobbling, vibration, flash, attracts the fish up, and then they see that fly, and they're like, well, easy meal. They just grab it. I also think, too, I kind of talked about this during the steelhead episode in the spring. I feel like some fish, when they're small, that's what they eat. They eat water bugs, they eat flies, they eat all kinds of little things. It's such a normal thing. And, in the lakes, it's so competitive for food that when they're young, they see something, they just eat it. They eat it, they eat it, eat it. They don't think twice. That doesn't change once they get older. Like they still have that reflex and be like, oh, there's a bug, I got to grab it. Even if they're a big fish, you catch giant fish on tiny baits, and not just, tiny jigs and stuff. I'm talking little tiny flies will catch giant fish. So that's a cool technique. And like you said, I haven't seen anyone do that around here anyway, but maybe in your area, that's a normal thing. But around here, haven't seen a lot of people do it. So maybe it could be the hottest tip of 2024. So thanks for that, Andrew. So this episode is, like I mentioned, it's called, well, I'm going to rename it, of course, something more funny than this, but Tackle Box Essentials. Now, everyone has at least one tackle box, I assume. And back in the day, before the tackle tray system used to be, the norm, everyone had those tackle trays where you unclip the front, open it up, and you'd have the trays that swing up, and then you have some storage underneath. Now, like Andrew, he gets a lot of old tackle boxes from people, and you always find weird stuff in the bottom of the tackle box or in any of those little pockets on the top. Now, some of this stuff, me and Andrew were kind of talking about this before. Some of that stuff, you see it in a lot of tackle boxes, and usually it just looks like it's crap that you'll never use. And it usually is. It's just like, oh, it was a gimmick or something like that. Like everyone has in their tackle box, but no one ever used it. But we're going to talk about a few things that have made our life easier and maybe a little safer. So I thought we could go through one at a time, and we're going to talk about our experience of using them and try to convince you guys to get this stuff into your tackle box as well. Because most of the stuff we're going to talk about, it's not expensive. It's very inexpensive. Some of the stuff here you can buy at the dollar store, but it's really good to have in your tackle box throughout the whole year, even during ice fishing season as well. So the first thing that I think a lot of people forget to have, especially if you're just getting into the sport, is super glue. Now, super glue has many uses, some good, some evil. But super glue is one of those things I always have. You can buy it at the dollar store. It may not be like, super glue or crazy glue brand, but you can get it at the dollar store if you want. And it is something that you can use for so many things. And one thing that I really like is gluing my plastic bait onto my jigs, or my chatterbaits. Now, Andrew kind of talked about, some of the new Evo chatterbaits from Z-Man and how they have like an amazing hook keeper on them. And the Elastec, once you pull it onto the hook keeper, it doesn't come off. You don't need it for that. But a lot of times when you're fishing other trailers, one drop of super glue before you put that plastic up onto your jig, it holds it on all day long. And other times it'll just slide down. It gets annoying. You'll have a bite. You'll set the hook. You have the fish on for a second, and then the jig flies out of its mouth, and it comes back, and the plastic bait's all balled up down right over the point. And you're like, why? Like, I just lost the fish. It's because if you put a drop of super glue on the head, that would have held it up, and the hook wouldn't have got all balled up, or the bait balled up on the hook, and you would have caught that fish. So that's one of the main things that I use super glue for. I always have it ready to go. You can use it for so many different baits, to hold up stuff, to keep skirts on, so many things like that. What's another use that you use super glue for, Andrew?
So another one is if you tied a knot, let's say like on the, especially with braided line, if you are tying, either you're dressing a treble because all of a sudden you realize, I want that. But even if you're just tying a frog or just tying your hook onto the line, if you want a little extra confidence in that hook or in that braided connection, you can put a dab, or you're tying onto your leader, you can put a dab of super glue onto that knot. And it just gives an extra bit of protection, kind of a hard shell, so that it won't be perhaps wearing away as easy through the cast of the guides and whatnot, or on that bait.
Yeah,
and so
I have used it for that too.
Yeah, it can be helpful for that. And the other thing I had thought of is kind of a poorer snenario. If you get a hook in your hand or you cut yourself with a knife, super glue can be an awesome little thing just to glue that cut shut. And, kind of a little first aid little tip to have. It's always useful to have.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that too. I've cut myself a few times over the years, that like with a knife or flying a fish deep, and you're backcountry, and you're like, you know what? It may be borderline, I need stitches, but you're not going to get stitches because, you're 4 or 5 hours from the car, maybe more, right? So can you use super glue on a cut? Well, you can. I've done it for years. Is it the best option? Well, let's see what the Mayo Clinic says about this. So this is what they say. Super glue can be a viable option if used under the right circumstances. And the right circumstances, they say, are small and clean cut, not too deep, and not infectious. So if you have an open wound that's infected, putting some super glue on that ain't going to help nothing. So don't do that.
Steal in that sepsis.
Yeah. If you cut yourself with, say, like the flay knife, and you're far away from any, actual medical help, you have to clean it out. We're going to talk a little bit about a first aid kit in a bit, but clean out the wound. If it's not too deep, you hold it together, you put a bunch of super glue and then pinch it together, and it actually like seals it. And then I put a little bit on top. It kind of makes like a hard crust on top of super glue, but it actually seals it, and it doesn't let any dirt or grime or any gross thing into your hand, which can actually help you from not getting infected. This, the Mayo Clinic, it says, if you choose to use household super glue or even over-the-counter adhesive products, do so with caution and understanding of the risks, including infection and scarring. So obviously, if you have a cut, say you got it on your face and you super glue it together, it's probably going to leave a scar, probably a terrible one. It's not going to be like nice and smooth. But as you notice, they did say that if you choose to use household super glue or over-the-counter stuff. So over-the-counter super glue is used for cuts all the time. I know that in boxing, they do it all the time. If they get a cut, they'll super glue it together, they pinch it closed, and it sets almost instantly. So it's a very fast, solution to, a wound. But again, make sure it's clean. You want it to be super clean. You don't want it to have like, a bunch of pine needles and, dirt and fish scales in there. You're like, oh, let's just seal it up. See what happens, right? That's bad. Don't do that. But yeah,
another
super
thing
glue.
super glue is fantastic for is also bait repair. So they have things like Mend It, which is designed for like soft plastics. But let's say you're using it'll work on some soft plastics as well, just regular super glue. But if you have a hollow body frog or something and it's gotten torn by a pike and it's no longer holding water, or the legs are falling out the back, or let's say you lost the legs in that frog and now it's filling with water every cast, you can just super glue those holes shut, squish it shut, or just seal that little crack on it. I even had some hard plastic baits where they get a crack because I've smashed it against a rock or something stupid. And you can super glue and kind of just like smooth off some of those over top of the cracks, and they'll seal as well. So even mending some of your baits when you're out in the water is also, it's useful to have around.
Definitely. And again, you can get this at the dollar store. I prefer to buy like the nicer container with the little squeeze sides. I just find it's easier to do that as compared to having those little tiny roll up ones. You're like, oh, they're like single use. You can't reuse them because they just basically dry up and you can't get the knob off the top. You're like, ah, dang it. Anyway, budget for this project, $2. Next thing that we would highly recommend you have, this one is a bit more expensive. It can be expensive. It doesn't have to be though, is hook cutters. Now, Andrew has a bougie pair and I have a more budget pair. So why don't you talk about that?
So hook cutters, and we don't mean side cutters. Side cutters are used for like snipping wires. Hook cutters are miniature bolt cutters essentially. So they have the articulated like hinges. So they will cut heavy gauge hooks. A lot of musky anglers use it because they want to preserve the life of that fish. So if it's hooked deeply, they can just cut the hooks instead of trying to unhook it. They'll just put new hooks in the bait later. And then those little what is left in the fish's mouth can come out, but they're also really useful. Let's say you get snagged in your leg or in your hand, or let's say you go to lip a fish and the extra treble gets snagged into your wrist. If you have those handy, you can quickly cut the hook off that's right in your wrist, so that it's no longer going to be pulling and scratching against your skin. So for a safety side of it, it is also very useful for your own safety, let alone the fish's. But I have a Knipex, or an Epex, some people call them. That is kind of like the best ones you can get on the market. They work really, really well. It cuts through musky hooks like butter. Like, it is surprisingly easy to cut through a musky hook with those things.
Yeah, like they're designed to cut through nails.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But I was fortunate. What I did was I went around and I found it at a hawk shop and was able to get it a brand new package in package for $30. And normally they're like $90 pairs. So I was fortunate. I found a really good deal on an old pair. But even if you find an old set at a garage sale or something like that, pick it up, give it some TLC with some nice lubrication, some oil, and you can get those things working well again. They're pretty much bulletproof unless they've literally been sitting in a lake for years. So even if you get a used pair, having them there is fantastic.
Yeah, and if you can't go around to garage sales, because who has time for that, you can go to, Canadian Tire, Princess Auto. Princess Auto they sell like the, just the knockoff version of the more expensive ones. If you don't have $90 to buy a pair, you can get a pair for like $30-$40. Are they as good? No. Will they work? Absolutely. I actually got this cheap pair in the States at like Harbor Freight, and it was like $15. And I ended up cutting maybe a few hooks on it. It's pretty good, but you can tell it's actually the cutter's already chipped and everything like that. So the ones that I got that were Princess Auto, they're about $40. They've held up a lot better. So don't go super budget because they'll fail on you. But if you spend around $40 at Princess Auto or something like that, you can get a decent pair. You don't have to get the $80 pair. It just is, it'll probably last a lot longer. But like Andrew said, another thing that I'll do sometimes, it happened to me twice over the years. When you go musky fishing, you have your hook cutters and you're like, I'm going to, if the fish takes it deep, I'm just going to cut the hooks out. But oftentimes where I end up cutting out the hooks is in the net. So you always see like, I'll have like a Medusa, fish grabs it, it's in the net. I get the hook out and then the fish thrashes around in the net and that Medusa just completely gets covered in like 5 pounds of netting. And, you take a picture of the fish, you release it and you look at the net and you're like, okay, there's a bait gnarled up in the net. And, maybe it's like prime time and you're like, I don't want to scoop a fish in the net with a hook, like a bunch of hooks in it. So you're trying to get the stupid lure out of the netting and it's taking forever. And you're like, you know what? I don't care. Hooks are like $2 each. Just cut the hooks off. I did that this earlier in the summer. I was fishing with our buddy Paul and I caught a fish and the spinner bait that I hooked the fish on, the trailer hook, jammed into the mesh of the net and I couldn't get it out. I was like, oh man. So I just cut it. I got it out eventually, but I just cut it to get the bait out of the net. So it is handy. Hopefully you don't hook yourself and have to use it, but it is good to have. You don't want to have just a hook stuck in your leg and you're like, I can't get this out. All I have is a pair of crappy needle nose pliers. You're trying to cut the hook and it's like, it's not working. These things, it's like Andrew said, it's like butter. It's just like, it's amazing. The first time you use it, you're like, what?
And even the pros Cooper Gallant was just fishing a tournament recently, and he was fishing a spook and it got right into his leg with a fish still on it.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, like it's one of those things that can happen to anyone. We've had some really close calls. Thankfully, neither Jesse or I have ever been hooked while the fish has also been attached to the lure. I've been very fortunate because
had some close calls.
Yeah, some very close calls.
Yeah,
but we're always careful about fish handling. But again, professionals are using this stuff all the time, and it can happen to them because it's still an untamed wild creature that's thrashing around. So being prepared for it is the off chance you might need to cut those hooks, even if you're not a musky angler. It is much better to have these with you so that you can deal with it if something ever came up.
So speaking of hooks, I thought we could talk a little bit about hook sharpeners. Now, this is one thing that I see a lot of anglers lacking on. And hook sharpeners are kind of like the deal for musky anglers. Like musky anglers are always like, you got to sharpen your hooks, got to sharpen your hooks. And they're always sharpening the hooks. Every time they, they hit a rock, sharpening the hooks. They catch a fish, sharpening the hooks. That's because you fish all day, maybe to get one bite, maybe. So you want those hooks to be legitimately razor or needle sharp. You want them to be so sharp. With bass fishing, I find, the hooks are thin, they're small, they hook the fish pretty good. Having sharp hooks is obviously important. But when you're fishing for muskie, you need the hooks to be ridiculously sharp. And so many people, they'll buy a fishing lure, they'll take it out of the package and they'll just tie it on and cast it. They're like, it's brand new. The hooks are sharp. The hooks are not sharp. Believe me, they may seem sharp, but they're not. When you get hooks from a factory, they're pretty sharp, but then they have like a coating on top of them that makes them not sharp. You have to actually file that coating off to get to the actual steel, and then the hook will be really sharp. Why don't you tell us about the fingernail test, Andrew?
So the fingernail test, if you have that hook point and you have your thumbnail there, and you just drag that hook point along that thumbnail. In fact, I'll do it with one of the flies that I have here. So you just drag that hook point across your thumbnail. It should start digging in. Now this one you can't really see on the camera, but it's not even digging into my nail. It's leaving some scratch marks, but what you want it to actually do is start to like grab and hook in with very little downward pressure. You just want to be touching your nail and drag it across. So when you're sharpening it, you just give it a couple strokes with your file, and then you try it again. And once you start feeling that tip kind of really dig into that nail, just start to catch, I should say, not dig in, you want it to catch on that nail. You know that it's now sticky sharp. It's actually going to, as soon as a fish puts his mouth there, it's going to be getting caught in any imperfections or ridges in that mouth. And as soon as pressure is applied, it turns and actually starts heading in. If it's sliding across your nail, which the inside of fish's mouths are very hard. I mean, I don't recommend it, but if you catch a pike and you touch the roof of his mouth, it's like rock hard and covered in teeth. So you need something that can actually penetrate through that hard palate.
Like you mentioned, it's not just muskie and pike fishing. One of the main hooks that I'm always sharpening is my chatterbait hooks when I'm bass fishing.
Oh yeah.
Like I have this one, it's like my special white jackhammer. I have this jackhammer. I've had it for like 3 years. I have no idea how it hasn't got bitten off by a pike. Like it is very fortunate lure. I fished that through stump fields, through rocks, and the hook is almost filed down to nothing because I've sharpened it so many times, because I'll fish it and then it'll get snagged into a stump. There's this one area we fish and it's all stumps. It's like a flooded field. And it's a great spot to chuck a spinnerbait. Absolutely great. But for some reason, the fish just love chatterbaits in there. And I have no idea, because the spinnerbait, they come through everything. The chatterbait, every other cast, right into a log, right into a stump, right into a rock.
I think it's because every other angler who fishes that spot is smart enough not to throw a chatterbait, so the fish just never see them in there.
I know. So I've had that chatterbait stuck in so many things and, have got it out of everything. But oftentimes you'll look at the hook and the tip's rolled. And you're like, okay, so you get out the file and a few strokes. And again, if you don't know how to sharpen a hook properly, we're not going to describe how to do it on the podcast. The best way is look up a YouTube video on how to do it properly. There's different kinds of files you can use. There's different techniques to do it. Do the one that seems, that you'd be the most comfortable with. And a file, you can get a file for, $15-$20 for a good one that'll last. My file I've had it for like 5 years now, and we've sharpened hundreds of hooks with it, and it's still fine. But yeah, always check your hooks. Like you never know when you hit something. And like I said, the tip of your hook will just roll. And that hook now is not sharp at all. You can literally, you ever have a fish that grabs your lure and you set the hook and then it just like shakes it, flies out of its mouth. You're like, how didn't that get the hooks? Like it had 3 hooks in its mouth. You look and the hooks are just dull.
In fact, I was fishing with Jesse a couple of years ago now, and I was fishing one of my OG, like I think it's the second lure I ever bought. It's a little rattling wrap, and I love that lure. It's the old silver minnow, silver blue like minnow pattern on it. Anyways, I was fishing that, and I lost three or four fish in a row, and I'm like, what's going on? Like something is messed up. So I like, okay, let me check the hooks, and it was 2 treble hooks on this bait, and one of the hook points on the front treble was rolled. Like it was like a ball, because I remembered I had snagged it on a rock earlier that day, and I never inspected the hook after. I was able to get it off, and I didn't think anything of it, and I lost 4 fish in a row because one of the points of the 2 treble hooks was rolled, and it's just that's the one that, as that treble hook's hanging back, it's the front of the bait, that's the one that makes contact first. And because of that, I was losing this fish. So I sharpened it right away. And then I kept fishing that bait, and I didn't lose a single fish after that. So 100%, there's no doubt in my mind, it was that single rolled hook point was preventing me from catching fish. So don't think, oh, there's still enough. There's, a total of 6 hook points. 5 of those are still good. We're good to go if 1 or 2 are rolled over. Make sure if you see anything that's not ideal, just give it a quick sharpen. It literally took me 10, 15 seconds. But it wasn't until I noticed it. So just regularly inspecting your bait, especially if you have snagged or you just caught a fish. Check your hooks quickly. They're all good. Keep fishing.
Make every cast count, because you never know when you're going to hook your PB. I really try to do that when I'm muskie fishing. It's like every cast I make, I'm there's a giant muskie that's going to be following my bait on this cast, And sometimes, you may think, I haven't sharpened my hooks in a while. I didn't sharpen them today. And you just keep casting. Just literally stop. Stop. And you'll be happy when you sharpen your hooks and you have that full confidence that, you touch the hook and it's like, ooh, that's sharp. That's good. Yeah. Just start casting it out. First cast goes right into a rock. Then you have to do it all over again. But it's actually pretty therapeutic if you know how to do it right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is something that a lot of people probably have, but probably not a lot do, because you see a lot of pictures on social media and people are like, look at this 8-pound walleye, and it's like 3 pounds. It's like, do you own this one item that you should have? It's called a scale. So get a scale. Here's the thing, we don't weigh a lot of fish. We actually just got a new Bubba scale this year. So we have been weighing our fish this year, and I have a Berkeley scale as well the last few years, but we don't oftentimes weigh our fish because I personally don't care. Like if I catch a bass and it looks good, like it looks like it's over 4 pounds, I'm gonna weigh it if I have a second to do it. But like I'm not gonna weigh like a 2-pound bass. I don't care. It's a 2-pound bass myself. But you see so many people and they way overjudge the size of their fish all the time, especially bass. People are like, oh, there's 5-pound bass, and you're like, that's probably 3 pounds. Like it's a nice fish, 100%. That's a nice fish, but it's not 5 pounds. So that's one of my biggest pet peeves. I don't really care. But it's just funny when people are like, oh yeah, I went out and caught a whole bunch of 5-pounders. It's like, yeah, you did. Sure you did. But so we have a very, like I was saying, we have a really nice Bubba scale this year. It's one of those like tournament quality scales. It's really nice. And me and Andrew have been fooling around with it. It has a bunch of different modes, and it's like tournament mode and, all these different modes. Right?
We have little competitions with ourselves and this fishing in the same boat.
Yeah. Well, again, do we need that? No, we don't do tournaments, but we enjoy that. So that's why, we got a nice scale. But I
even
had this
Berkeley scales were fairly accurate.
Yeah.
You can test it every once in a while if you want to make sure that it is accurate, but they aren't bad, and they are cheap. They're dirt cheap, and they come with a tape measure in them too oftentimes. So you can even check it. The really old ones are called the Fisherman D Liar, and they were like they're cast steel. I gave Jesse one. I have a couple more, and they have a built-in tape measure and like the hook, and it's literally a big spring on the side. You see it.
Yeah. And you can't lie. That's for sure. It was always disappointing. I remember back in the day, I had one of those old like yellow spring scales. I think my dad gave it to me, and I tested it. It was actually pretty accurate. Like you're not going to be able to tell like, oh, that bass was 3.3 pounds. It would kind of just be like in quarter ounce, maybe, increments.
Quarter pound increments.
Yeah. Quarter pound. Yeah. And quarter ounce. That's a good spring sale.
Jesse brings his, baking scale. He's like, this is what I weigh my vanilla beans on, and this bass weighs exactly 0.3 ounces.
It's true.
I'm going for fry today.
I miss my old baking scale, the one that you put the weights on the side. Yeah, I used to be a baker, people. That's some information you didn't know. But anyway, back to the fishing. So my dad gave me this old scale, and I think it's always funny when you catch a fish and you're just like, oh yeah, it's a big one. Like oftentimes with bass, like, oh, it's a 5-pounder. And then you weigh it and it's like 3 pounds. You're like, oh, that's embarrassing. So anyway, actually speaking about overestimating fish, I was fishing with our buddy Paul. I think it was like, it's got to be late June at this point. We were fishing for muskie and we were out in the Kawarthas and we fished this day and it wasn't the best day. We ended up getting one in the bag, and I usually always overestimate how long the fish is. I'm like, oh, that's a 40. That's a 40. So I get this fish in the bag and I'm like, oh, it's not that big. It's probably like 32, 33. And then he's like, no, it's bigger than that. And I'm like, no, it's not. We like bumped it and it was like 38. I was like, yay, for once I'm not being an idiot. So the next thing is something that so many times I was like, why don't I own this? Or like, I lost mine. Why didn't I pick up another one? Because it's one of those things that when you don't have it, it makes your life a living heck. But when you have it, it's no big deal. It is something that will destroy your fingernails and your pocket knife blade if you don't have. And that is split ring pliers.
Yeah.
That is one thing for years I never had. I just use a pocket knife or my fingernail. And I'm just like, once I spent the $10 on a pair of split ring pliers, my life changed for the better. I was a different person at that point. It makes changing hooks so easy.
If you're getting split ring pliers, get like the smallest ones you can find. Like get the mini split ring pliers. Because you can get split ring pliers, but I find as soon as you go to change it on like a Rapala Rattle and Wrap even, they don't even fit into the split ring to be able to change that hook or something like that. So if you're a bass fisherman, go for the smaller ones. If you're musky, you can get away with pretty much anything because those split rings are, pretty sizable. But take note of, once you see them being used, you'll notice that you may want a smaller pair. So do your best to find, I think Rapala makes one that I use, and it's pretty good at getting the smaller split rings open.
Yeah. I actually have a very small pair, and it works on anything from regular bass lures all the way up to musky lures. You can also get needle nose pliers with built-in split ring little nib on the end of them. So that's kind of a multi, purpose tool. You can use it for, regularly unhooking fish, any little repairs in your boat if you have to, and you can also use it to change hooks. So again, we said about sharpening hooks, but you should also have a few replacement hooks. Like we mentioned, if you have to cut a hook, and if you don't have split ring pliers, especially on big musky split rings, it's almost impossible to get it out. And if you use a pocket knife and it slips, you cut yourself, you have to get your super glue out. See what I'm saying, people? You have to have these things. It all comes back to the things you need in this kit. So split ring pliers, again, $10, $15 for a decent pair. I was at sale the other day. They had like multiple different pairs of them. Canadian Tire, Bass Pro, Canadian Sports. Any of your local tackle shops will have these. It is kind of an essential item. But a lot of people don't have them. So listen up, people. If you don't have it, get it. The next thing we're going to talk about is something that me and Andrew use all the time. And it is an absolute game changer. Now, we're not talking about the bad version of this. We're talking about the good version of this. And the good version is not the boga grips, not the metal boga grips. We're talking about the fish lip grippers. I think that's what they're called. I have the Rapala version. I think almost every brand, there's a Berkeley version, there's a Mustad version.
I have the Mustad version and a Rapala version.
Yeah. I actually picked up a Mustad version at Dollarama for like $4 a few months ago. It actually works pretty good. But if you don't know what these are, I like the Mustad version because it floats too, which is cool. But it's basically, back in the day, they came out with the fish grippers, and it was like, a handle with two metal claws that basically you grip onto the fish's lip.
I have a set. That's what I bought when it came out, because I was like, this is great.
Yeah. And you know what? Say you're fishing for pike, you're fishing for muskie, even bass with a treble hook in its mouth, and you don't want to get hooked. You just lip it with this, and then you kind of like can open its mouth and work on the fish. The problem with these is they actually do a lot of damage to fish, like a lot.
Yeah. 90% of the fish that I put those lip grippers on, like old like pike and stuff like that, at some point these little snot rockers start thrashing the boat, and it tears right through that thin layer of skin right behind their jaw. And I stopped using them before I had another option because I'm like, I just got to deal with these fish because I feel terrible trying to release these things with giant holes in their faces now.
Absolutely terrible. And like, I know they're still kind of popular for saltwater stuff, but I have found that most freshwater fishermen don't really use those anymore. They're not as popular. They do a lot of damage to fish. If you're catching fish to eat them, go for it. But if you're doing catch and release, I would not recommend them. Oftentimes they had scales built in and everything. Sounds great. Bad. So the new thing that came out, we just call them the lip grippers, right? And they're plastic. They open and then they clamp around the lip, and it's not super tight. The test that I always give people when they tell me, they're like, oh, does it hurt the fish? I just hook it right here in between my thumb and my index finger. It basically just pinches on my skin. It doesn't hurt. It's just tight enough that it can't pop off your skin. It could if you pulled it hard enough. And it doesn't hurt. It has a very large flat surface on both sides, so it won't cut through the fish's mouth. And once you press down on it, it kind of locks in, so it's not going to be able to open. So they're not that expensive. I think you could probably, again, like I said, you can get them at Dollarama sometimes for about $5. The Rapala version that I had, I think they're about $20. It's a little bit better quality in my opinion. But what we use them for is kind of everything. Like, we even use them when we're musky fishing. Like, if we have to kind of prop that fish's mouth open, we'll stick those grippers in its mouth, kind of hold its mouth open. Mm-hmm. That's great.
It gets your hand out of the gills. If you're concerned about getting your hand, like if you're unsure of how to handle it properly, you get your fingers just under the gill plate, and you're concerned about damaging the gills, it's fantastic because you just get it on that bottom jaw. You can just hold it, not pry it, but you hold your jaw open with it. So they're really used for that. We'll often use it with them still in the net, in the water, and then we use that as well. So it's like all these things can help control the fish and keep it safe. They're fantastic.
Yeah. And we use them for bass, walleye, pike, everything. One cool thing that I use it for is when you're taking photos. So say you catch yourself a nice bass, 4-pound bass, you want to take a picture of it. And say you're in a kayak or a canoe or a boat that's a little higher and you can't really keep it in the water and you have to get your camera ready and your tripod. What we have is the fish grippers. And they have a little loop on the end, and then we have a long bungee with carabiners on the end, maybe 3-4 feet long. That one end is hooked onto the boat. The other end, you hook onto the fish, you throw it in the water. Let the fish recuperate in the water, let it swim around a bit, and then you get your camera ready, you get your tripod ready, you get set up for the photo, you grab the fish, you take the pliers off, take a photo, put the fish back in the water. The fish is out of the water for 5 seconds. Instead of 30 seconds as you get everything ready, or you're trying to keep it in the net and, try to balance everything. It just makes it so much more stress-free. We've done that with muskie too. I don't like doing it with muskie unless they're in the net because I feel like the muskie will just take off and just break the, 150-pound cable that I have on there. Cause for some reason they're giant muscular fish, but I won't risk it with muskie, but with bass I will, but it's a fantastic thing.
Recuperating fish is a good point too. Cause even when I went on that fishing charter, we had a couple trout where it took a bit longer to unhook than ideal, but we were going to release them. So the charter captain, he again has those grips, clips on the bottom jaw of the salmon. Again, has it on a long lead and just puts it over to the side of the boat. And we just kept trolling. Like, we never stopped trolling the whole time. So now this thing is sitting beside the boat. It's getting all that oxygen rushing past, all that water rushing past. And then after a few minutes, like, we didn't have to be hanging over trying to do it in the cold water and whatnot. We just let the boat go and it's hanging on the side. And then after a bit, it was ready to go. So we bring it back up, unhook it, and release it in a good release. So even for that, when they lock onto the jaw, they don't release. I don't think I've ever had one open up on me without me actually opening it.
Yeah, I haven't myself. It's one worry that I've had. Yeah. One trick that you can do is oftentimes the lip gripper will come with like a large piece of elastic bungee. And if you tie a loop in it, like tie an overhand knot through that, it'll actually clamp over the other handle. I've done that. So if you do that and it's tight enough, there's no way that the handle will be open because there's basically a big elastic band around it that's attached to the main lanyard. So that's one thing you can do. Again, like Andrew said, we've never had one open up. I'm not saying it won't happen, especially don't have your 7-pound PB walleye hanging off the side of the boat and your Dollarama fish grips and then blame us because it opened on the side of the boat. Not our fault. Don't care. Be cool. Anyway, so that's another thing. Again, $5 if you can find them at Dollarama, or $20. It's well worth it. And they last forever. Like Andrew's had his for what? Years. Yeah. I think I've had mine
it's
for
so chewed up from pike teeth.
Yeah.
like
8-9 years at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they come in different sizes. So I'd recommend if you're fishing for slightly bigger fish, I have the bigger Rapala ones. They're about, I'd say like 9-10 inches big, but they also have smaller ones that are like 5-6 inches. So pick the appropriate size one. They're great. And if you're a bit of a wussy and you don't like touching fish, it's great. You don't have to touch fish.
For when I fish with people or inexperienced anglers and they don't know how to handle the fish or don't want to handle the fish, they just hold those and it holds the lip and they just hold it up. It's a lot easier to position a fish that way than having it spinning on the end of the line with like hooks hanging by your face. So that one is, again, safer for if you are inexperienced taking photos with it, you can still use it.
Yeah. You're just like to a rookie. I know this catfish has 3 lethal spines on it, but I'm going to show you really quickly how to hold it. Now, careful, they're a bit slimy. And if you get stabbed, you're definitely going to need some super glue. Or you could just say, hold this fish gripper. Yeah. So speaking of getting stabbed by a catfish, which believe me, happens all the time. Actually, our buddy Zach, who Andrew actually knows too, he actually moved out to Trenton. And he's fishing somewhere down there, and he sent me a video. And all he did was send me the message on WhatsApp, and it said, "Have you ever been stabbed by a catfish?" And then I responded. I was like, "Why?" He's like, "I just got stabbed by a catfish." So it does happen. They do have some pretty sharp spines, but if that does happen, another thing that you should have 100% of the time, doesn't matter where you're fishing, is a first aid kit. Now, the size of the first aid kit is going to vary if you're in a boat or if you're shore fishing. We actually have these little first aid kits. My buddy Mario, he actually gave me a bunch of the small, just little first aid kits that you can literally put in.
Pretty much, right?
No, it's in a little soft case. It's almost the size of a wallet. It's very small, and it has a bunch of, bandages. It has some gauze. It has like sanitizing pads, like all this stuff for small, minor wounds. It's not a full kit, very basic, but even that, if you cut yourself, say you had to super glue a cut together out in the backcountry and you didn't have that, how are you going to sanitize that cut? How are you going to get that stuff out? Or if you have to, use some gauze, or even if you need a bandage, like you ever got like a bad paper cut or something, imagine just getting one of those braid cuts, when you pull on braid too hard, it just slices through your hands.
I was about to say that. A braid cut, it's so much nicer when you have like a little bit of like medical tape. You can just wrap it in after. Yeah. Like, okay, let's not touch that again today.
Yeah. Just be man and just use electrical tape. It's fine. But if you're in a boat, I would recommend getting a slightly bigger first aid kit that has, a little bit more stuff in it that you would need, especially if you're going backcountry, because you don't want to be stuck out there and you need something. And you're like, I don't have this or I don't have that. And then you're just going to be uncomfortable or in pain or at risk of getting an infection. That's not good. Fish are cool. Catching fish is awesome. Losing a hand due to infection, bad. Don't want that to happen. Absolutely terrible. So first aid kit, again, we bring them everywhere. Ice fishing. I have little ones for my pack when I'm out steelhead fishing or trout fishing, when I'm just like, shore fishing as well. I have one in my car. But when I go camping, we bring a bigger one with us as well. So that is something that it's more of like a safety thing. It's not one of those cool items that'll help you catch more fish. No. But hey, you can always catch more fish without infection, right?
So it helps you stay in the water longer because you could treat yourself on site. It does help you catch more fish.
And have you ever literally just had a terrible headache? Like I get headaches all the time. Oftentimes it's caused by, the weather. You're like, oh man. Yeah, like sunstroke or something. But sometimes, just like a front moves in and you're like, man, I got this like pressure headache. Anyone got a Tylenol, or like an Advil or something?
Or, refusing to wear your glasses because you don't feel like buying prescription polarized lenses and you don't want to wear cocoons. It happens.
I don't want to wear cocoons because they look terrible. And prescription sunglasses are like $500.
I tease Jesse about that all the time.
Yeah. So here's my dilemma.
Every time we go fishing, he's like, oh, I have a headache. I'm like, you're not wearing glasses.
So what do? Do you wear glasses so you can see and not get a headache? Or do you wear polarized sunglasses so you can see the fish and get a headache? It's worth it every time, people. What? Now I forgot the point I was going to make. But anyway, do it. So we're going to talk about another cool item that I didn't have for a long time. And now I'm just like, why didn't I get this? Because they're so cheap. They're so convenient. They're so nice. And it seems like the dumbest thing. You're like, well, why wouldn't you bring that? It's a hand towel. Now, I started picking these up. I noticed at sale. I don't know if they still have them, but at the time, sale had these nice towels. They were about 1.5 feet long, 1 foot wide. And they had like a metal grommet in the corner with a carabiner. So you could literally hook them onto your belt or onto the boat. And we got them for when we went steelhead fishing, because if you ever go steelhead fishing in the, in the winter, oftentimes when you catch a fish, you're not going to be dragging the fish up on the shore. You're going to keep in the water in the net. The water's ice cold. You got, slime on your hands. Your hands are freezing. And then you release the fish and your hand is just like freezing. You're like, oh, it's like, trying to warm up your hands. And you're rubbing it on your coat and it's not working because your coat's waterproof. So you grab your rag and your towel and you wipe your hand and it's all dry and it's nice. And it's fantastic. It's like one of the best pleasures of all time. You're just like, yes, warmth.
And then you eat your sandwich and it doesn't taste like pike slime.
It's the best. I mean, it's okay. Pike slime is okay, but not pike slime is better. I'll tell you every time. So the towels that I bought, they were about $5. I've seen them at Canadian Tire too, and you can order them, I'm sure, on Amazon and stuff like that. But get one or two of them. They're great for fishing trips. If you're catching a bunch of bass or you have some, just bait or crap on your hands and you're about to eat a sandwich, wipe your hands off, put on some sanitizer, and you're good to go. So the rag, it seems like something that's just so basic. It's something that you probably use every day at your house, and you can grab one of those from your house if your wife doesn't kill you. That's a good thing.
And if you want to be an absolute cheapskate to have the exact same product, if you go to Canadian Tire or Sale, your outdoor store, you can often get this little box and it's full of grommets that you install. It looks like a tarp grommet, right? Same thing, but all you need is a block of wood and a hammer, and it comes with all the parts you need. And you can put a grommet into whatever you want. So for that, if you have old towels at home, you could put your own grommet in there, put your own little carabiner clip, however you want to attach it, and hang them, have multiple in the boat. So that way, if you just want to use an old towel, but you want it to hang up, there's another little option you could do, install your own grommets on it if you want.
Red Green's like, if the women don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy.
I'm in the second category.
Nice. All right. So the next thing is another thing that oftentimes I see people don't have. A lot of these items, they're items that I've gotten over the years and they've really improved my day and just made it just more carefree. And you're just like, oh, I'm so glad I have it. You just we take it for granted now. But before, do you remember the day when you tried to cut braid without braid scissors?
Yeah. And even if you have a good knife, like a sharp knife, you still have to hold that braid and you got to hold the hook with the one hand and make that loop tight to the knot and just try and cut it. Even that can be a pain with a really sharp knife even.
I used to just hold the line in my teeth and just grab my knife and just, if I move up close enough, I probably won't cut the tip of my nose off. Good thing I have my super glue and first aid kit and some Tylenol for later. But yeah, just, super line scissors or braid scissors. They're serrated. Andrew was just showing me, you can actually get ceramic ones now so they don't rust. They're cheap. They're $5. I picked them up again. I found some at some Berkeley ones at Dollarama the other day. They were $4. If you go to Sale or any fishing store should have them, I wouldn't spend more than $10. Even the little Cuda ones, they're $10. The little ones. You can get nice big ones, but I'd rather have a bunch of small ones because I lose them all the time. I usually put them on one of those retractable lanyards, or on the top of my tackle box has a bunch of magnets built into it than one of those Plano boxes. So I usually have one stuck on the top. I have one in I have one of those ammo boxes that's full of random tools in my boat. So I always have a pair in there. So I end up losing them, or they're on your leg and you're in the canoe and you turn sideways and bloop, drops to the bottom of the lake, just another sacrifice to the lake gods, right? Another pair of scissors, but they make it so good. They cut through braid, 80-pound braid for muskie. Mm-hmm. Easy. There's no fraying, nothing like that. Cuts so good. If you ever tried to cut braid with regular scissors, like scissors you use in your house, and you're just trying to cut it and you're like, why isn't it working? And it just starts fraying. You're like, these scissors are garbage. And then you grab a pair of braid scissors and it's just one small effortless snip and it's perfectly good cut. You're like, what?
On limp braid. You don't have to have it tight. Just limp braid hanging off the knot. Whoop, just cut that off.
It's always good to have a pair of scissors too. Say you have to trim your frog legs. You got a new frog. You're like, I'm going to trim these frog legs. I'm getting short strikes. Just pick out your scissors, cut the legs. You're good to go. So
now I love, I like having pocket knives. I have a small collection of them. Even the last tackle box I got, they had a Bowie knife in there. Like, knives are handy to have. Don't get me wrong. You'll always have a fillet knife with us. Usually, if you're planning on keeping the fish, you definitely will. But you don't want to start using your fillet knife to start cutting your line or, cutting things against the gunnel of your boat or on top of a tackle box, trimming whatever. Scissors are literally the probably second most used tool, either the first or second most used tool on any given fishing day that I use. And braid scissors, they're fantastic. They're more useful to me. If I had to bring two things with me, it'd be braid scissors. And the next thing we're going to talk about, I'm sure, if I think I know Jesse's list.
Skittles? Oh, no.
Only the sour ones. But forceps.
Yeah, we talked a bit about needle nose pliers, which are great. But hemostats or forceps are like surgical, ultra thin finesse pliers. And, they lock together too. Originally they're for like, closing off like arteries and veins, because you'd be able to crimp down on it and lock it down and then let go of it. And, that in the surgery, not just for fun, but in surgery, it would be good. But the cool thing is with fishing is like, how many times does a fish take a hook? You have a small hook even, or a regular size hook, and it just takes it super deep and you can't really get pliers in there. And you're like, oh, what am I going to do?
Or if you're fishing with your kids and you're going for sunfish and you're realizing you have to keep more and more sunfish because they keep swallowing the worm hook. It's like, oh, it's a little too deep. And they have these tiny little mouths.
I said, set the hook. That actually just happened to me. I took my nephew out fishing a few weeks ago, and we were fishing in one of the Kawartha lakes. I was chucking baits for muskie. He was fishing for sunfish, and it was a slow day. The weather was kind of weird. It was just slow. Even the sunfish bite was kind of slow. Normally we'd catch, dozens of them, right? And I think we were only like 4 or 5, right? It was just slow. And he was kind of losing interest. He's only 11 or 12. And I'm casting my musky lure, and I see his bobber just, and all of a sudden, bloop, goes right under, pops up again, bloop, goes down. I'm like, hey, like bobber, like set the hook, right? So he's just like, oh, starts reeling in, right? And the fish just completely took it so deep. And it was literally a sunfish, like 3 inches long. Its mouth was like the size of like a pea. I was like, how am I supposed to get in there? Luckily I had my hemostats and I was able to get down in there and get the hook out, and the fish was fine, obviously. But yeah, like you said, fishing with kids, good. And the cool thing with hemostats is you can just click them onto your shirt or anything like that.
Yeah, when I'm fishing creek sides, it's clipped onto the bottom of my shirt. Even on my boat, I'll have it either clipped to my shirt or the inside of a rain jacket or something. Or even there's a bit of a tag that hangs below the seat. So I'll just clip it onto that. It's always like within grasp of me. And I just want to finish the thought, like of those two tools, if I had to pick 2 things to bring with me that wasn't tackle oriented or like rods and reels, it would be scissors and forceps. Like those are my, I can, if I have to dispatch a fish, I can do that with the scissors. I can cut the bottom of the throat right underneath the gills. Scissors, it's easier to do that than with a knife.
And safer too.
So
yeah,
like for me, I would much rather have a pair of scissors with me and a pair of hemostats than a pair of needle nose and a knife. That's just my preference, but I find them way more useful.
Definitely, yeah. And I've heard a lot of guys for musky fishing say they had to use their hook cutters, and they cut the hooks off, and maybe just a little part of the hook is in the fish's mouth, and it might just be just barely sticking out, and you have to like kind of reach in and grab it. Those big pliers may not be able to grab it. So those hemostats or forceps, they lock in. So you can reach down, grab onto the hook, lock it down, and then get it out. So you're not just like trying to, grasp at it and, prolong the release of the fish. So they're super handy, not expensive either. You can pick up a pair for $10. And it's one of those items too, I lose all the time. So I seem to always, when I'm in the Gagnon Sports, I'm like, oh, $10, just buy another one. I probably bought like 3 or 4 of them in the last 2 years because I just lose them.
I have noticed too, there is some different versions you can get. There's a bunch of different companies that make them. What I find is just take a look at them first, see how flimsy they are. If you open it up and the handles are like really wobbly, oftentimes the tip of them, if you're trying to twist a hook out, the jaws will just kind of split, because they're so narrow and small, they're for a very delicate purpose. But you can get some. I know Rapala makes a kit, comes with little line snips and a pair of forceps and a nice little like belt clip. And those, like, they're nice and solid. They're a little bit wider. Again, they're not like pliers, but they're maybe like an 1/8 of an inch wide instead of like a 1/16 of an inch wide. And they just have a bit more strength, so you can actually get on and actually pry a hook if you have to. So again, I do like the forceps or the hemostats, whatever you want to call them, but I have had some in the past that were a little too delicate for what I needed to use them for. So just make sure they do have, you can find some and they have that bit more stiffness, and then you can easily use them for getting those hooks out.
Yeah, it's true. Like there are some that are more heavy duty. There's actually some that have little scissors right above,
Yeah.
where they split, so you can cut line 2 with them. So that's great. Again, there's a lot of different kinds you can see, and usually the ones that are fishing, like a good brand, if you're going to get like Berkeley or Rapala, they're going to be good. But I have picked up a pair, or someone gave me a pair, or I found them down at the creek, and they were flimsy. Yeah. And I was trying to get a hook out and the thing would just kept splitting. I was like, this is a piece of junk. Yeah. No wonder someone dropped it on the floor and they didn't care. So I thought I would just right now talk about our giveaway today. Actually, this giveaway is pretty cool because we're actually going to give away a few things that we talked about today. It's kind of a little AOA kit that we put together for you guys. So it's going to actually have a bunch of these things. No, we're not buying you $80 Knipex bolt cutters. No, but it actually does include a bunch of stuff. Has some super glue, split ring pliers, fish grippers, and braid scissors. So one lucky Patreon member, again, you have to be a supporting Patreon member to be entered into this giveaway. One of you guys or girls is going to be the winner of those things. Hopefully you already own them, but if you don't, then you'll have them. And if you already have them, it's great because like I said, you'll lose them all the time. So at least you'll have a backup, or it would be a good gift for someone else that's just getting into fishing.
Keep some in the front of the boat and some in the back.
One of you guys or girls is going to win that. We do appreciate everyone on Patreon for supporting the show. Again, there are expenses to running the show. So you guys and girls that donate as little as $2 a month to help this support the show costs so that me and Andrew don't have to pay for it out of our own pockets because we're poor, because we spend all our money on fishing stuff. Yeah. I hear you. But we do appreciate all of that. And we would like to say one other thing too. We actually have some pretty sick giveaways coming up. It is August. Like, what the heck? This summer is going by really fast, but we're already kind of swinging towards the fall podcasts already. Like I'm planning those already. We're going to be talking about a bunch of cool stuff coming up. I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of some previews. So we actually have a special guest who's going to talk to us about fall smallmouth bass fishing. This guy is a hammer. He's a guide. He's really cool. And he's going to give us some awesome tips. Look forward to that episode in September. We're also going to have some shore casting for salmon episodes, which we do every year, and everyone loves them because everyone wants to catch one of those giant missile rockets that fly into the harbors in September or late August. We're going to have some episodes about that, and we're actually going to have a giveaway that is glow spoons. Ooh, I'm not going to tell you who that is, but that's a cool giveaway. So glow spoons for salmon fishing. And then we're going to have also, just because me and Andrew like muskie fishing, hopefully you guys too like muskie fishing, but we're actually going to have some muskie episodes in October as well. And we're also going to have a very experienced guest for that. So those are some of the episodes coming up. Again, we get people tell us, some of our Patreon members or Instagram followers, they tell us topics that they'd like to hear as well. I do put those into consideration, and we have put a bunch of those into the episodes that have already been in the past too. So we do appreciate those. If you guys have any good ideas of topics, or even if it's a small topic, we can work that into an interesting fishing fact if that is something that won't take a full hour to talk about. So send us your suggestions. Thank you again for all the reviews. We've gotten a lot of really good reviews lately. I forgot to mention, like a few weeks ago, we actually passed 100,000 downloads. We're way past that now, but that was kind of a big thing for us. I forgot to mention it like 4 weeks ago. I was like, oh, Andrew, we hit 100,000. I'm going to mention it tonight on the podcast. Totally forgot. Totally forgot. So we do appreciate every download. Make sure that you check our Patreon for the winner of the giveaway. Again, I will contact you directly if you win, but we do appreciate every download every single week. We appreciate it. And now, before the end of the show, we have the traditional thing that we do every week, the quote of the week. And to handle that, we have Andrew.
Remember to always bring your essentials fishing, like soft plastic frogs and chatterbaits. Chatterbaits.